The sky over Fort Stillwater was heavy with gray, the kind that pressed down on your chest without warning. A cool mist clung to the air as the transport plane touched down. Soldiers stood quietly near the runway, no signs, no speeches, just silence. Among them was Cletus Bumgardner, once the loudest voice in any room, now a shell of a man. His uniform hung damp on his shoulders, boots scuffed and dusty, eyes staring straight ahead like he was still on patrol in Kandahar. Nobody said a word. He hadn't spoken in months, not since the ambush, not since everything changed. They used to call him Big Cleet, life of the mess hall, the guy who carried 3 MREs at once and still had room for dessert. But now, Cletus moved like he was wading through molasses. There was no welcome party, no music, just the ache of something missing. Some of the younger soldiers whispered behind their gloves, wondering if the rumors were true, that his whole squad was taken out, and that his K9 partner, Sniffles, had died saving him. But Cletus never confirmed it. Not in writing, not in therapy, not to a soul. His barracks room was just as he left it. A crooked photo of his mama on the wall, boots lined up in military fashion, and an empty metal crate in the corner, the one where Sniffles used to sleep. For 6 days, Cletus sat on his cot in silence, chewing at his thumbnail, staring out the window as if expecting something to crawl out of the fog. He barely ate, didn't shave. He refused to meet with Brenda Lou Picklesworth, the base therapist, or Chaplain Jimmy Skunk Hat Craddock, who showed up every morning with lukewarm coffee and quiet prayers. But on the 7th morning, something broke. Cletus wandered out toward the southern training yard, dragging his boots across the damp grass. The other soldiers, Bobby Ray Fumbleton, Earl Toothpick Wiggins, and Charlene Mayonnaise, watched from a distance, unsure if they should follow. And then it happened. A single bark, sharp and desperate, echoed across the field. Cletus froze. His breath caught in his chest. He turned slowly. And there he was, Sniffles, muddy, panting, his left ear torn, but unmistakably alive. The German shepherd let out another bark, this time louder, and bolted toward Cletus like a rocket. The man fell to his knees as Sniffles launched into his arms, tail wagging violently. Cletus sobbed into the dog's neck, gripping him like a lifeline. The others stood frozen. Some cried, some covered their mouths. And just like that, the silence was broken. Not by words, but by a bark that brought a broken man back to life. The news spread through Fort Stillwater like a grease fire in the mess hall. By mid-morning, nearly everyone on base had heard the same 3 words. Sniffles is alive. It sounded like a joke at first. Sniffles, the stubborn old shepherd with the crooked tail and a nose that could sniff out C4 through concrete. But no one was laughing. Not after seeing Cletus Bumgardner on his knees in the mud, weeping like a boy who just found his best friend again. That image stuck with them. A war-hardened man cracked wide open by a bark. Inside the base clinic, Charlene Mayonnaise crouched near Sniffles with a wet cloth, gently cleaning dried blood from his fur. He's got some burns and a torn ear, she said. But no broken bones. This dog's tougher than most of us. Cletus sat nearby, silent again, eyes locked on Sniffles like he still couldn't believe he was real. He hadn't spoken another word since the reunion. Not even when Brenda Lou Picklesworth quietly entered the room and sat beside him, clipboard in hand and concern painted across her face. Sniffles shifted suddenly, letting out a soft growl. His eyes darted to the door. Before anyone could ask why, it swung open and in walked Earl Toothpick Wiggins, chewing as usual on an actual toothpick. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, tipping his cap. "Ain't that the ugliest miracle I've ever seen?" Cletus didn't smile, but his eyes twitched at the corners. Earl stepped closer, then knelt. "You remember me, don't ya, Sniff?" The dog gave a single tail thump in response. Outside, Bobby Ray Fumbleton stood beside the barracks with Darla Jean Noodleman, watching the clinic window. "You think this means Cletus is back for good?" Darla asked, voice soft. Bobby Ray crossed his arms. "I think he never really left. Just didn't have anything left to hold on to. Till now." They didn't say more. No one wanted to speak too loud, like they might scare the fragile thing that had just been reborn. That night, For the first time since returning, Cletus didn't sleep alone. Sniffles curled up beside his cot, just like before, his breathing deep and steady. Cletus lay awake, staring at the ceiling, one hand resting lightly on the dog's back. And then, barely above a whisper, he spoke. "I thought you were dead, buddy. It wasn't much, but it was something." Sniffles didn't move, but his tail thumped twice. And outside that small room, the bass exhaled, quietly, cautiously, like maybe hope had found its way back after all. The next morning, Fort Stillwater woke to the sound of rain tapping on tin roofs. In the barracks, Cletus Bumgardner sat upright on his cot, still in the same clothes from the day before. He hadn't slept much, but it didn't matter. Sniffles hadn't left his side all night. The dog lay curled up by the foot of the bed, breathing slow and steady, as if he knew his presence alone was the only thing keeping his partner grounded. Cletus reached down and rubbed behind the shepherd's ear. "I don't know how you made it out, boy," he whispered, "but I sure ain't letting you out of my sight again." At the mess hall, folks pretended not to stare, but eyes followed Cletus and Sniffles everywhere they went. Most folks just gave a nod or a pat on the shoulder. A few muttered prayers under their breath. Peggy Sue Muffintop, who ran the breakfast line, didn't say a word. She just slid an extra scoop of biscuits and gravy onto Cletus's tray and gave Sniffles a raw sausage link like it was standard issue. "No charge," she said quietly. "You both earned it." But not everyone on base felt that warm glow. Later that afternoon, out near the old storage yard, Jimmy Skunkhat Craddock leaned against a fence post, arms crossed, watching from a distance. "Ain't saying it's not a miracle," he told Earl Toothpick Wiggins, who stood beside him, chewing on his ever-present toothpick. "But something about this don't sit right with me." Earl raised an eyebrow. "You thinkin' what I'm thinkin'?" Jimmy nodded. "That dog was declared dead in the official report. Body unrecovered. How'd he get back? Who brought him in? And why now?" Back inside the clinic, Brenda Lou Picklesworth sat across from Cletus during his scheduled check-in. He still wasn't much of a talker, but she'd learned how to read between the silences. "Sometimes the mind buries things deep," she said gently, flipping through her notes. "Even things that happened right in front of us. Especially the ones we can't make peace with." Cletus didn't answer, but his fingers tensed. Sniffles stirred beside him. Brenda tried again. "Do you remember anything from the day of the ambush?" Cletus blinked slowly, eyes locked on the far wall. After a long pause, he said, "There was a second explosion, after the first hit." His voice was thin, dry. "And then, I heard barking, but it wasn't Sniffles." Brenda leaned in, eyebrows drawn. "Then whose was it?" Cletus didn't respond. He just reached down and touched the scar behind Sniffles' left ear. One he swore wasn't there before. That's when Peggy Sue Muffintop arrived, holding a flash drive in one hand and a look of regret in the other. "You deserve the truth," she said, handing it to Cletus. "This came from an intel contact of mine. Shows what happened after the drone cam went dark. What they didn't want you to see." Cletus plugged it into the laptop. The footage flickered. More flames, screams, and then, behind the wreckage, a military truck, unmarked, pulling away with a cage in the back. Inside, a dog was clawing at the bars. Sniffles barked at the screen, not out of fear, but recognition. And Cletus, for the first time since the reunion, stepped back from the dog like he didn't know who or what he was looking at anymore. Cletus Bumgardner didn't say a word as he walked out of the hangar. The flash drive burned cold in his jacket pocket, but the weight of it was nothing compared to the weight on his chest. Sniffles followed close, ears low, eyes watching him with that same quiet loyalty. But now every look, every movement felt off, manufactured, like the dog was waiting for permission to continue pretending. Cletus stopped just outside the barracks, rain still falling in soft sheets. He turned to Sniffles and whispered, "If you ain't him, why does this still hurt like hell?" Inside the common room, Earl Toothpick Wiggins and Jimmy Skunkhat Craddock stood at the window watching Cletus. Earl chewed thoughtfully. "I've seen war tear a man apart," he said. "But I ain't never seen a dog do it." Jimmy nodded slowly. "Because this ain't just grief. It's betrayal." Cletus built his whole survival on that dog's loyalty. And now he's standing in front of something that looks like him, but might not be. Later that night, Cletus sat alone in his barracks, watching Sniffles sleep on the floor. The laptop sat open beside him, paused on the final frame of the secret footage. The unmarked truck vanishing into the dust, cage shaking violently in the back. Cletus rubbed his eyes and exhaled slowly. "Did they break you, boy? Did they bring you back piece by piece? Like you was just a weapon?" The dog stirred but didn't rise. A low whimper escaped his throat, almost like guilt. In the base chapel, Brenda Lou Picklesworth lit a candle and stood in silence. She'd counseled dozens of soldiers, but this was different. "Sometimes the body survives," she whispered, "but the soul gets rewritten." She had seen trauma reshape people. But what if someone else reshaped the trauma? Erased part of a man's grief and replaced it with something almost comforting? That's what they'd done to Cletus. Handed him a memory wrapped in fur, and expected it to heal him. The next morning, Peggy Sue Muffintop found a note slid under her office door. It was written in Cletus's shaky handwriting. For words, "Don't follow me." "See," she rushed to alert command. But by then it was too late. Cletus had checked out a jeep before dawn and driven off base. No orders, no clearance, just gone. And in the passenger seat, looking out the window with calm eyes and silent understanding, sat Sniffles, head resting on Cletus's lap, as if they both knew the truth had to be found far from the reach of anyone wearing a uniform. The road stretched on like a scar through the North Carolina backwoods, wet with last night's rain and eerily quiet. Cletus Bumgardner drove without music, without a plan, just instinct. His grip on the wheel was tight, knuckles white, mind spinning like an old film reel stuck on repeat. In the passenger seat, Sniffles sat alert but calm, head resting on the window. For a long while, neither made a sound. It was the most peace Cletus had felt since Kandahar. And yet, he couldn't stop shaking. "We were supposed to die that day," he muttered. "So how the hell are you here?" By mid-morning, they reached an old supply outpost, long abandoned, overtaken by weeds and rust. It was there that Cletus stopped the jeep and just stared. He remembered this place, not from before the war but after. Flash. A helicopter. A metal crate. "This is where they brought us," he whispered, more to himself than the dog. Sniffles jumped down and began sniffing around the ruins like he remembered it too. Cletus followed, boots crunching broken glass, heart racing faster with each step. He stepped into a half-collapsed hangar. The smell of oil and decay still hung in the air. On the far wall he found it, a charred corner of what used to be a bulletin board. Papers half-burned, but one still legible. Reintegration Phase 2, K9 Psychological Conditioning. At the bottom, a red stamp, "Successful." Cletus felt his stomach drop. "They didn't just fix you," he whispered. "They rewired you." Back on base, Brenda Lou Picklesworth sat with Darla Jean Noodleman and Earl Toothpick Wiggins, maps and files spread out across the table. "If he's following the memory, he'll head straight to the experimental site," Brenda said. "He's chasing ghosts. But that place was never meant to be found again." Earl leaned back in his chair. "He ain't chasing ghosts. He's chasing the last thread of what makes sense to him." Inside the hangar, Cletus knelt beside Sniffles. He looked into the dog's eyes. Those same eyes that once comforted him in foxholes, that dragged him through smoke and bullets. "Did you save me? Or did they program you to make me think you did?" His voice cracked. Sniffles responded with a soft whine, then pressed his head gently against Cletus's chest. And just then, a sound broke the silence. A door creaked open behind them. Cletus turned sharply. A man stepped out of the shadows. Older, civilian clothes, scar above his left eye. "I was wondering when you'd come back," the man said. "Been waiting a long time to tell you the truth." Cletus didn't recognize the man at first. The years had carved lines into his face like tree bark, but that scar above the eye, faint, but sharp, triggered something. Flash. A voice over the comms. Extraction team's late. Hold position. The man stepped closer. Name's Frank Tisdale. Used to run logistics for Operation Rock Lantern. Cletus rose slowly to his feet, shielding Sniffles behind him out of instinct. That's a ghost op, Cletus said. Didn't exist. Frank gave a dry laugh. Most things worth hiding don't. Frank pulled up an old metal chair and sat. Like this was a conversation long overdue. That day in Kandahar, he began. We knew the convoy would be hit. Intel picked up chatter, but Command wanted to test post-trauma response systems in real time. You were a pawn, Cletus, and so was that dog. Cletus's fists clenched. You sent us in knowing we'd be slaughtered? Frank nodded slowly. And watched you survive what no one should have. Sniffles paced behind them, ears flicking at every sound. Frank glanced at him. That dog pulled you from the wreckage, yes. He saved your life. But he didn't die after. He paused. They took him, reconditioned him, removed his identifiers, tried to overwrite the loyalty imprint so he could be reassigned to another soldier. But something stuck. He kept reverting, responding to your name, your voice. Frank shook his head. That shouldn't have been possible. That wasn't in the design. Cletus stepped back, his mind spinning. And outside, somewhere in the fog, another bark echoed. The air in Fort Stillwater had turned thick with questions. Word spread quickly after Brenda Lou Picklesworth's check-in session with Cletus Bumgardner. Not about what he said, he hadn't said much, but what he noticed. The scar behind Sniffles' ear. A scar that wasn't there before Kandahar. Earl Toothpick Wiggins was the first to say it out loud during lunch. Dogs don't grow new scars on old wounds. Not without leaving a story behind it. A few heads nodded. Others looked down, not ready to question the one thing that had finally brought peace to a broken man. That afternoon, Charlene Mayonnaise pulled Sniffles into the vet bay for a full scan. Just making sure he's all good, she told Cletus, though her voice carried a nervous edge. As she ran the scanner down the dog's side, her brow furrowed. His ID chip isn't where it used to be. Cletus stood up. What do you mean? You scanned it when we shipped out. Back of the neck. Charlene nodded. That's the standard. But now it's in his shoulder. Like it was reinserted. And the chip's registry was reprogrammed 2 months ago. Cletus stared at her. That's impossible. He went missing 6 months ago. The silence in the room tightened. Even Sniffles seemed uneasy. Charlene met his gaze. Cletus, I think this might not be the same Sniffles you lost over there. Or at least, not exactly. The idea hit him like a punch to the gut. He looked at the dog. Same eyes, same tail twitch, same reaction to his voice. But the scar, the chip, the timing. His chest tightened with something worse than doubt, betrayal. Out behind the motor pool, Jimmy Skunkhat Craddock met quietly with Peggy Sue Muffintop. She handed him a manila envelope. Got it from Supply Records, she whispered. There was a dog matching Sniffles' description transferred from an airbase in Turkey. No name, just a number. Arrived here last week. Jimmy flipped through the papers. So someone's been covering tracks. Peggy Sue nodded. And the question is, why? Later that night, Cletus sat alone with Sniffles in his barracks. He stared at the dog for a long time, his hand hovering just above the scar. Sniffles looked back at him, eyes steady, trusting. Cletus whispered, You know things, don't ya? The dog didn't move, but Cletus swore something shifted in his gaze. Like the dog wanted to speak but couldn't. Outside, thunder rolled low in the sky, and in the hallway, Brenda Lou leaned against the wall, listening through the thin door, a deep frown on her face. The rain hadn't let up for 2 days. It soaked Fort Stillwater to the bone, and yet no one seemed to care. The storm outside felt minor compared to the one building inside Cletus Bumgardner. He hadn't been sleeping. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw fire, heard barking, but not Sniffles. Not exactly. Something about the pitch was different. He sat on his cot, watching the dog sleep at his feet, listening to the steady hum of the storm. "If you ain't Sniffles," he muttered, "why do you keep looking at me like you are?" Down in records, Darla Jean Noodleman had taken an interest of her own. She wasn't military, just civilian staff, but she had a knack for reading between the lines. With Peggy Sue's envelope in hand, she pulled deeper into the archives. One file stood out: Operation Rock Lantern. Classified, but redacted enough to raise eyebrows. She jotted down names, dates, and a strange note attached to the transfer file of a K9 unit. Subject modified for reintegration testing. She leaned back in her chair, stomach nodding. Modified? Reintegration? That same evening, Earl Toothpick Wiggins barged into Brenda Lou Picklesworth's office. "I don't know what kind of rehab y'all are running, but we got a dog here that either died and came back from the grave, or someone's lying through their teeth." Brenda didn't flinch. "I've been digging too," she said. "That's not just any dog. And Cletus isn't just any soldier. Whatever happened over there, someone didn't want it known." She opened a drawer and pulled out a flash drive. "This was sent to me anonymously 2 nights ago. Video footage. Drone cam. From the day of the ambush." Meanwhile, Cletus stood out by the empty kennels, rain soaking through his shirt. Sniffles stood at his side, ears alert. "You remember this place?" he asked, but the dog didn't react. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small patch, one he'd ripped from Sniffles' vest the day they deployed. The dog sniffed it. His ears twitched. He looked up at Cletus and let out a soft whine. That was when something cracked. Cletus knelt down, face inches from the shepherd's. "They say you ain't the same dog, that you were brought back, changed." Sniffles didn't move, but his breathing grew quicker. The look in his eyes, sharp, almost human, sent a chill down Cletus's spine. "But if you ain't him," Cletus whispered, voice breaking, "why do I feel like you remember more than I do?" Back in Brenda's office, she pressed play on the drone footage. The screen lit up with smoke, gunfire, and a broken convoy. And then, clear as day, a dog, burned, limping, dragging a body from the flames. It wasn't Sniffles, but it was wearing his vest. The room was dead silent as the footage ended. Brenda Lou Picklesworth leaned back in her chair, arms crossed tightly. The glow of the monitor faded, but the image stayed burned in her mind. The dog dragging a soldier's body across scorched sand, collapsing beside it, motionless. The vest read Sniffles, but the dog's markings were different, subtle, but enough. A second K9 had been on site, a detail no one ever mentioned. "There were 2 dogs," she said aloud. "2 vests. One truth." Across the base, Cletus Bumgardner walked alone toward the old supply hangar, Sniffles close behind. The patch still clutched in his hand, damp from the rain. His thoughts were loud. Did they switch him? Clone him? Was this some government experiment? Or worse, had he forgotten something he wasn't supposed to remember? "They lied," he muttered, stopping at the hangar doors. "And if they lied about you, what else did they bury?" Inside the hangar, Charlene Mayonnaise and Darla Jean Noodleman were already waiting, standing near a locked cage with an empty collar hanging on the door. "You came," Darla said quietly as Cletus approached. "We didn't know if you would." Charlene gestured toward a thick folder on the table. "We found this in old shipment logs. Sniffles was scheduled for reintegration training in Germany, but the transfer was canceled and rerouted to a facility that doesn't officially exist." She swallowed hard. "Cletus, this dog isn't listed as returning from Kandahar. He's listed as repurposed." Cletus felt the air leave his lungs. He looked at Sniffles, no, the dog in front of him. Same eyes, same reaction to his voice, but now, all wrapped in uncertainty. Sniffles sat calmly, head tilted like he was listening to every word. And maybe he was. "Then what is he?" Cletus asked, barely above a whisper. "A replacement? A copy? Or just some poor mutt shoved into a dead dog's collar to shut me up? So you erased my unit, sent my dog to a lab, and handed me back a shadow of what I lost, expecting me to say thank you?" Frank didn't answer. He just lit a cigarette with shaking hands. He wasn't supposed to find his way back to you, but he did. Dogs like him aren't just tools, they remember. And that terrified the people running the project. Cletus looked down at Sniffles, who now sat beside him, watching every movement of Frank like he understood every word. Then came the question that had been buried for months. Why? Cletus asked. Why bring him back to me now? Frank exhaled a long breath. Because someone higher up got nervous. Thought you were close to remembering the truth. They figured putting the dog in front of you would shut your mind down. Buy them more time to clean up. But it had done the opposite. It had woken him up. And now, standing in that forgotten hangar, with the man who orchestrated it all sitting calmly before him, Cletus realized he had one chapter left to write. The rain had stopped by morning, but the ground outside the hangar was still soaked, and the silence that followed was heavier than any storm. Cletus Bumgardner stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at the man who had admitted to orchestrating the most painful chapter of his life. Sniffles sat silently beside him, unmoving, but alert. Frank Tisdale had said everything. Laid it bare. Operation Rock Lantern, the controlled ambush, the conditioning, the memory suppression. All of it. So now what? Frank asked, voice low. You gonna shoot me? Cletus shook his head. No. You don't get to be the final word in this story. His voice was steady now, the first time in months he'd sounded like himself. You buried my unit, lied about my dog, tried to rewrite my grief into something manageable. But grief ain't meant to be clean. He looked down at Sniffles. You didn't break me. You gave me back what mattered. They left the hangar behind. Cletus didn't say another word. He drove in silence, back roads winding through fog and pine trees. Sniffles sat close, his head resting on Cletus's lap like always. But something had changed. Cletus no longer questioned whether this was the Sniffles. The scars, the ID chip, the modified behavior, they didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that this dog had come back, against orders, against logic, against design. Back at Fort Stillwater, Brenda Lou Picklesworth, Peggy Sue Muffintop, and the rest of the crew waited at the gates. No one cheered. No one saluted. They just stood in silence as the Jeep rolled in and parked. Cletus stepped out, Sniffles by his side. He walked straight to Brenda and placed a small black flash drive in her hand. There's enough in here to burn the whole program down, he said. You do what you think's right. Later that week, after the files were leaked anonymously to a journalist in D.C., Operation Rock Lantern was exposed to the public. A congressional investigation followed. Names were called. Files were subpoenaed. And deep in the shadows, the ones who built the system began to scramble. But none of that mattered to Cletus. He wasn't after justice. He was after peace. He left the army a month later, bought a piece of land out in the Blue Ridge foothills, built a small house with a porch. No internet, no neighbors, just quiet. And Sniffles, the real one or the version that survived, it didn't matter now. Because every morning, when the sun broke over the trees, Cletus would drink his coffee and whisper, "We made it, didn't we?" And Sniffles, without fail, would bark once, soft and certain, as if to say, "Yeah, we did."